The pen in Isabella's hand was a weapon, and she wielded it with the casual lethality of a queen signing an execution order. It moved in a fluid, confident arc, her signature a slash of dark ink on the crisp, bone-white paper of the divorce settlement, a final flourish, a period on the sentence of their marriage. She slid the document across the polished mahogany table towards Ethan, a smirk playing on her lips. It wasn't a smile of happiness, but of victory. Across from her, Ethan sat perfectly still. He looked not at her, but at the document that legally dismantled their shared history. His hands rested on his knees, his posture betraying none of the turmoil that roiled beneath his calm exterior. He was a man carved from patience, his stillness a form of protest against the frantic, grasping world his wife inhabited. "There," Isabella said, her voice a silken pronouncement. "It's done. Aura Lifestyle is officially mine. The house, the accounts, the business, all of it." She leaned back in her leather chair, a picture of triumphant ownership. Her father, Marcus, seated beside her like a silent, imposing gargoyle, gave a gruff nod of approval. He had always viewed Ethan as a temporary fixture, a decorative but ultimately useless accessory to his daughter's ambition. Isabella's lawyer, a man whose smile never quite reached his eyes, began gathering his copies. Ethan's lawyer, David, a steady and unassuming old friend, simply watched his client. He knew this was more than a legal proceeding. It was the final act of a long and painful play. "I was, however, feeling generous," Isabella continued, her tone dripping with condescension. She gestured vaguely toward a clause on the last page. "As a parting gift, you can keep your little pet project. What was it called? Emberlight? That old dusty trademark you were so fond of. I've had my lawyer add it in. It's all yours. A little something to remember us by." Marcus chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "A sentimental trinket," he said, dismissing it with a wave of his hand. "Let the boy have his drawings." Ethan's eyes finally lifted. They met Isabella's, and for a moment, the air in the sterile conference room grew thick. He saw no remorse in her gaze, no flicker of shared memory, only the cold, hard gleam of acquisition. She believed she had stripped him of everything that mattered, leaving him with the dust of a forgotten idea. She thought she had won. She had the company, the brand, the future. She didn't know that the worthless piece of paper she just discarded was a lottery ticket worth $4.4 million, and the drawing was just hours away. Ethan picked up his own pen. It felt heavy in his hand, a tool not of finality, but of beginning. His signature was the opposite of hers, careful, deliberate, and clear. Each letter was formed with an architect's precision. He slid the document back to the center of the table. He didn't know, not with absolute certainty, that the final email would come through. He only had faith in his own work, and more importantly, unshakable faith in Isabella's arrogance. Her blindness was the one asset he had been able to count on for years. The scene was set. The trap was laid and signed. The fallout was inevitable. Before we dive into how this all unraveled, a quick hello to everyone joining. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. So do me a favor and drop a comment letting me know where in the world you're watching from. It's a great way to feel connected, isn't it? All right, thank you for that. Now, let's get back to the quiet storm brewing in that conference room. A storm that had been gathering for a very, very long time. The roots of this moment stretched back months, to a dinner party that felt less like a celebration and more like a public execution of Ethan's worth. It was at their sprawling, minimalist house, a house Ethan had helped design but was never allowed to feel at home in. The guests were Isabella's circle, sharp-edged business associates, second-generation inheritors of wealth, and her ever-present father, Marcus, holding court at the head of the table. The topic, as always, was Aura Lifestyle. The brand was their shared creation, born from Ethan's design aesthetic and Isabella's ruthless business acumen. It had become a darling of the lifestyle market. its clean lines and aspirational branding gracing everything from ceramic mugs to high-end furniture. The new Nordic collection is projected to outperform all expectations, Isabella announced, holding her wineglass by the stem. We've secured placement in 3 major European department stores. A round of murmurs and congratulations followed. Marcus looked at his daughter with undisguised pride. That's my girl, always closing. You have the killer instinct. It's what separates the winners well, from the others. His eyes flicked to Ethan at the other end of the table, a subtle but unmistakable jab. Ethan said nothing. He was nursing a glass of water, a silent observer at his own feast. He had designed the Nordic collection. Every curve of the chairs, every shade of the textiles had come from his mind and his hand. He had spent weeks refining the prototypes, ensuring the balance between form and function was perfect. To Isabella and her father, he was just the others. Later, a sycophantic junior partner of Marcus's turned to Ethan. It must be incredible watching your wife build such an empire. You're the creative force, I hear? Before Ethan could form a reply, Isabella cut in from across the table. Oh, Ethan has his little hobbies. He's wonderful with concepts. He provides the initial spark, you could say. But turning a spark into a fire? That takes a different skill set entirely. The implication was clear. He was the flint, she was the steel, and the hand that struck it. He was a disposable component. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that crept up Ethan's neck. He kept his expression neutral, a mask of placid interest he had perfected over years of similar slights. He was tired of being the silent partner in his own life, the ghost in his own machine. He saw the condescending pity in the eyes of the other guests, and the triumphant glint in Isabella's. She wasn't just claiming credit, she was actively erasing him from their shared narrative. He excused himself from the table, claiming a need for fresh air. He walked not to the manicured back patio, but to his home office, a small, stark room that Isabella had relegated to the least desirable corner of the house. On his desk, amidst sketches and reference books, sat a simple, leather-bound folder. The embossing on the front was faint, almost invisible, a stylized flame inside a circle. It was the logo for Emberlight. He ran his fingers over the worn leather. This was his true work. Emberlight was the name and concept he'd developed years ago, before Aura. It was built on a philosophy of warmth, longevity, and quiet strength. Isabella had hated it. It sounds old, she had scoffed, like a retirement home or a cheap candle. Aura is chic, it's modern, it's what people want. He had acquiesced, shelving the project. But he never abandoned it. In this folder were hundreds of pages of design theory, branding guidelines, and philosophical notes. It was the complete architecture of a brand built not on fleeting trends, but on enduring principles. It was everything he believed in. That night, after the dinner party guests had finally departed, leaving behind a trail of empty glasses and lingering insults, Ethan stayed in his office until the early hours of the morning. The house was silent. He opened the folder, the scent of old paper and leather filling the small room. He looked at the elegant, timeless logo, and for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a ghost. He felt a flicker of his own light, a quiet ember that had refused to be extinguished. The heat from the dinner party's humiliation didn't fade. It solidified into a cold, hard resolve in Ethan's core. He had spent years accommodating Isabella's ambition, mistaking her drive for shared passion. He had allowed his own contributions to be minimized, telling himself that the success of the brand was all that mattered. But as he sat in his office that night, the memory of Marcus's dismissive gaze and Isabella's casual cruelty echoing in the silence, he understood a devastating truth. He was not a partner in her eyes, but a stepping stone. And stepping stones are, by their nature, meant to be left behind. His mind went back 2 weeks to an email that had landed in his personal inbox, the one he used for his private portfolio site, a site Isabella had once called a vanity project. The email was from a man named Alistair Finch, Vice President of Strategic Branding for Innovatech, a global tech behemoth known for its sleek, futuristic products. Subject: Inquiry regarding Emberlight concept. The email was brief and professional. Mr. Finch had stumbled upon Ethan's old portfolio page showcasing the Emberlight brand identity. He expressed a significant interest in the philosophy behind the name and the design language. He wrote, "We are exploring a new initiative that requires a brand identity rooted in warmth, humanity, and timelessness as a counterbalance to a high-tech product line. Your Emberlight concept is remarkably aligned with our internal brief." At the time, Ethan had read it with a detached curiosity. It was flattering, of course, but it felt distant, hypothetical. He had politely replied, thanking Mr. Finch and offering to provide more information if needed. He hadn't mentioned it to Isabella. What would have been the point? She would have dismissed it as another of his art projects, a distraction from the real business of Aura. Now, in the aftermath of the dinner party, that email felt different. It felt like a lifeline. It wasn't just a compliment, it was external validation of the very work Isabella had deemed worthless. He opened his laptop, his fingers moving quickly over the keys. He found the email and read it again. This time the words significant interest and remarkably aligned seemed to glow on the screen. He spent the next hour drafting a reply to Alistair Finch. He didn't just offer more information, he attached a curated 10-page PDF that distilled the core philosophy of Emberlight. He wrote about the name representing not a roaring fire, but the steady, enduring glow that remains. He explained how the design elements, the warm color palette, the natural textures, the blend of classic typography with clean, modern lines, were meant to evoke a sense of permanence and trust. He was articulating his soul as a designer, the very essence that had been suffocated under the cold, polished veneer of Aura. He hit send just as the first hint of dawn was breaking. The act felt definitive, a quiet declaration of independence. The next morning, Isabella was in a foul mood, already barking into her phone about logistics and profit margins. She barely acknowledged him as she poured her coffee, her focus already on the empire she was so certain she was building alone. The contrast was stark. Her world was loud, aggressive, and immediate. His was becoming one of quiet strategy, of moves being planned in silence. He continued his work on Aura, delivering the designs and concepts required of him. But his energy was divided. In the evenings, he retreated to his office, not with the dejection of a man escaping his life, but with the focus of a general planning a campaign. He fleshed out the Emberlight brand book, creating mock-ups of how it could be applied to packaging, digital interfaces, and physical products. He was preparing for a battle Isabella didn't even know was coming. A week later, he received a reply from Alistair Finch. It was more than a reply, it was an invitation. Innovatech wanted to schedule a video conference. They were serious, very serious. Ethan looked at the calendar invitation that appeared on his screen. The proposed date was 3 weeks away. A knot of anxiety and exhilaration tightened in his stomach. This was real. He had to navigate this perfectly. He needed an advisor, someone who understood both the law and the nature of the woman he was married to. That evening, he called David, his old college roommate, who was now a partner at a boutique law firm specializing in intellectual property and complex divorces. "David," Ethan began, his voice low, "I think my marriage is over, and I think I might have an opportunity, but the timing is delicate." He explained the situation, Isabella's increasing contempt, her belief that she was the sole architect of their success, and the burgeoning interest from Innovatech in a brand she considered garbage. David listened patiently, the silence on the other end of the line a comforting presence. When Ethan finished, David's voice was calm and measured. "Okay, Ethan, this is not about revenge. This is about securing your future and getting what you are rightfully owed. Her perception of value is our primary advantage. We're not going to fight her for aura. We're going to let her take it. We're going to let her think she's winning. In fact, we're going to help her win. And in return, we're going to ask for the one thing she thinks is worthless. For the first time in months, Ethan felt the crushing weight on his chest begin to lift. He wasn't just a victim of circumstance anymore. He was a player in the game, and he had just found his strategy. He would let Isabella's pride be the architect of her own downfall. He would let her build her glorious, hollow empire while he quietly salvaged the one true treasure from the wreckage. He looked at the leather-bound folder on his desk, the symbolic object of his hidden power. Isabella was about to make the worst trade of her life, and she would do it with a smile on her face. The call with David had been a turning point. It had transformed Ethan's simmering resentment into a focused, strategic plan. The objective was no longer to save his marriage. That ship had sailed, torpedoed by years of accumulated disrespect, but to salvage his professional identity and secure his future. David's advice was counterintuitive but brilliant. Don't fight her on her terms. Create new terms she can't even see. The very next week, as if on cue, Isabella initiated the conversation. She approached it not as a painful discussion between two people who had once loved each other, but as a corporate restructuring. They were sitting in their cavernous living room, the space between them feeling more like a boardroom chasm. "Ethan," she started, setting down her tablet. The screen was filled with charts and projections for aura. "I think it's time we were honest about the direction of the company and our lives." He simply nodded, waiting. "Aura needs to be more agile, more aggressive. It needs a single, unified vision," she continued, the corporate jargon a shield against any genuine emotion. "And frankly, our dynamic is holding it back. I've been speaking with my father and with my lawyer. I think the cleanest solution is for me to buy you out." "Buy me out?" Ethan repeated, the phrase so clinical, so transactional. "Yes, I've had the business valued. I'm prepared to offer you a settlement. It's very generous," she said, sliding a piece of paper across the coffee table. "You can have a portion of the cash accounts, and I'll assume the mortgage on the house. You walk away clean, free to pursue your other interests." Ethan looked at the figure on the paper. It was a pittance, a fraction of what his half of the company was truly worth. It was an offer designed not to be fair, but to be insulting. It was the financial equivalent of her dinner party speech, a number that declared him a minor contributor, a footnote in her success story. He felt the old sting of anger, the familiar urge to defend himself, to list his contributions, to fight. But then he remembered David's words. Her perception of value is our primary advantage. He took a slow breath. "And the intellectual property?" he asked, his voice even. "The brand itself?" Isabella laughed, a short, sharp sound. "The brand is the company, Ethan. That's the entire point. I am Aura. Aura is me. It stays, obviously." "Of course," Ethan said, feigning resignation. "I understand." He paused as if considering her insulting offer. Then he looked up, crafting his expression into one of hesitant, almost pathetic request. "There is one thing, though, a small thing." "What is it?" she asked, impatient. "That old trademark, Ember Light. I know it's worthless, just a filed piece of paper in the corporate records, but it has sentimental value. It was the first thing I ever designed with this kind of scope. If I'm walking away from everything else, could I just have it? You can keep Aura, all of it. Just sign over the trademark for Emberlight to me personally." Isabella stared at him. Her expression shifted from impatience to a kind of baffled pity. He could see the thoughts forming behind her eyes. How pathetic. He's lost everything, and this is what he's clinging to? A failed idea? This was the moment, the pivot point of the entire strategy. "You want Emberlight?" she said, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. "The brand I told you was a dead end from day one?" "Yes," Ethan said, looking down at his hands. It's foolish, I know, but it means something to me. A slow, triumphant smile spread across Isabella's face. She had him. She was taking the entire kingdom, and he was begging for a single, rusty coin she had already thrown in the trash. His request not only affirmed her victory, it magnified it. It was proof of his weakness, his sentimentality, his complete lack of business sense. "Fine," she said, her voice magnanimous. "Yes, of course you can have it. I'll have my lawyer drafted into the settlement. Consider it a gesture of goodwill." The secret video conference with Alistair Finch and his team at Innovatech happened 2 days later. Ethan took the call from a small, rented co-working space, ensuring absolute privacy. The contrast between this call and his conversations with Isabella was staggering. Here he wasn't a hobbyist or a spark, he was a visionary. Alistair, a sharp man with kind eyes and an appreciation for detail, was effusive. "Ethan, your brand Bible for Emberlight is one of the most cohesive and emotionally resonant branding documents I have ever seen. It's not just a logo, it's a complete ecosystem of feeling. It's exactly what we need." They talked for over an hour. They discussed the new product line, a suite of ambient smart home technology designed to integrate seamlessly and humanely into people's lives. The products were cutting edge, almost futuristic, and they needed a brand that felt grounded, warm, and deeply human. They needed Emberlight. Towards the end of the call, Alistair got down to brass tacks. "We're prepared to move forward with a multi-year licensing deal. We want to acquire exclusive rights to the Emberlight name and brand identity for this entire product category. We are talking about a significant investment, Ethan, but it is entirely contingent on one thing. You must have sole, unencumbered ownership of the trademark. Our legal team cannot proceed if there is any ambiguity about its status as a marital or corporate asset." Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. "I understand completely," he said, his voice betraying none of his emotion. "I am in the final stages of a legal separation. The ownership of that specific trademark is a key point of the settlement. I can guarantee that by the end of next week, it will be my sole and separate property." "Excellent," Alistair said. "Our legal team will draft the agreement. We'll be ready to execute the moment you give us the green light." When Ethan hung up, he sat in the silence of the small, anonymous office. He had done it. He had played Isabella's arrogance against her. He had turned her greatest weapon, her condescension, into his own. She was about to willingly hand him the key to a multi-million-dollar deal, all for the satisfaction of watching him, as she thought, walk away with nothing but a worthless memory. The stage was set for the final act. The final week before the signing was a masterclass in psychological warfare, with Isabella as the unknowing aggressor and Ethan as the stoic defender. She was incandescent with her impending triumph, moving through their shared spaces with the air of a conquering general. She took calls in the living room, loudly discussing plans for my company and the new creative direction she would be implementing as soon as the dead weight was cut loose. "I'm speaking with a design firm out of Copenhagen," she announced to her father over the phone one evening, knowing Ethan was in the next room. "They're fresh, they're hungry, they understand that a brand is a living thing. It can't be tied to old, sentimental ideas." Each word was a carefully aimed dart, intended to pierce Ethan's ego. But Ethan had already built a fortress around himself. The darts bounced off, harmless. He knew something she didn't. This knowledge was a shield, invisible and impenetrable. He continued his work, made his polite responses, and counted down the hours. The ultimate humiliation was reserved for a Tuesday afternoon. Isabella informed him, via a curt email, that he needed to clear out his personal effects from his office at Aura headquarters by the end of the day. She was bringing in the Copenhagen team to assess the space the following morning. He was being evicted from the creative engine room he had built. When he arrived, a security guard he'd known for years looked at him with pity, holding a box of empty cartons. "Isabella's orders," the guard mumbled, unable to meet his eye. Ethan walked into the office. It was a beautiful space, filled with light, with one wall made entirely of cork for pinning up ideas. It was covered in his sketches, in fabric swatches he'd sourced, in color palettes he'd developed. It was a visual history of his contribution to Aura. He began to pack. Methodically, he took down the sketches, stacking them neatly. He boxed up his personal library of design books. He emptied his desk drawers. All the while, Isabella stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching him. Her presence was an act of dominance, a final assertion of her power. She wanted to witness his dismantling. "Try not to take too long, Ethan," she said, her voice cool. "The new team has a flight to catch." He didn't look at her. He simply continued his work. He packed his pens, his drafting tools, and finally he reached for the one item he had brought with him from home that day. It was the leather-bound folder for Emberlight. He had intentionally left it on the corner of his desk, a silent piece of bait. As his hand closed around it, Isabella scoffed. "Still clinging to that thing? You know, it's almost sad. You should really learn to let go of your failures, Ethan. It's the only way to move forward." He paused, his fingers pressed against the worn leather. He could feel the weight of the hundreds of pages inside, the architecture of his future. He looked at her then, directly in the eye. He offered no defense, no retort. He simply gave her a small, enigmatic smile. It was a smile she couldn't decipher, and that infuriated her more than any angry outburst could have. He placed the folder carefully into the top of his box, like a crown jewel. That night was the quiet before the storm. Ethan was in his new apartment, a small but clean space he'd rented on a monthly lease. The contrast with the palatial house he had just left was stark. The house had been filled with expensive objects and unspoken tensions. This apartment was filled with cardboard boxes and a profound, liberating silence. He sat on a folding chair, his laptop open on a makeshift desk. On the screen was the final draft of the licensing agreement from Innovatech. Every clause, every subsection had been vetted by David. The numbers were there in black and white. An initial payment of $1.2 million upon execution, with the remaining $3.2 million paid out over the next 2 years. The signature line at the bottom was a gateway to a new life. He looked over at the box containing his office effects. The corner of the Emberlight folder was just visible. It was all connected. The humiliation he had endured, the secret preparation, the calculated risk, it all led to this moment. The signing of the divorce settlement was at 2 o'clock the next day. David had arranged for a digital courier from Innovatech to be on standby. The moment David confirmed that the signed and notarized settlement was filed, assigning the Emberlight trademark to Ethan, the Innovatech agreement would be executed. It was a perfectly timed, audacious plan. But it was still a plan. It relied on one unwavering variable: Isabella's complete and utter conviction that Emberlight was worthless. If she had an ounce of suspicion, a flicker of doubt, the entire edifice would collapse. He closed his laptop. The room was dark, save for the glow of the city lights through the window. He felt a deep, resonant calm. It was the calm of a chess player who has seen the entire board, who has anticipated every move, and who knows that checkmate is now inevitable. His opponent just didn't know it yet. She was still celebrating the capture of a pawn, oblivious to the fact that her queen was about to be taken. The conference room at the law firm felt like a stage set for the final act. The air was thick with the scent of expensive leather and the silent hum of accomplishment, or at least what passed for it in Isabella and Marcus's world. Isabella was radiant, dressed in a sharp, white power suit that made her look like an avenging angel of commerce. Marcus, beside her, was a monolith of smug satisfaction. He had successfully overseen the final excision of the only part of his daughter's life he'd never approved of. Ethan, in a simple dark gray suit, was an island of quietude in their sea of self-congratulation. David sat beside him, his briefcase on the table, a calm and reassuring presence. The lawyers exchanged pleasantries that sounded like the rustling of dry leaves. The notary, a woman with a perpetually serious expression, laid out the final signature pages. If you'll both review the highlighted sections and sign where indicated. Isabella didn't even pretend to read it. She'd been over it a dozen times with her lawyer. She knew what it contained, everything she wanted. She picked up the heavy, expensive-looking pen provided by her counsel. With a flourish that was both elegant and dismissive, she signed her name. The stroke of the pen was the sound of a door slamming shut on their shared past. She pushed the document toward Ethan. Her eyes gleamed with a cold, polished triumph. "Your turn." Ethan looked at the page. He saw the clause they had so easily inserted, the one David had reluctantly agreed to after a bit of performative haggling. All rights, titles, and interests in the trademark Emberlight, U.S. Trademark Registration Number 8745912, are hereby transferred to Ethan Cole as his sole and separate property, acknowledged by both parties to be of sentimental value only and to have no material market value. No material market value. The phrase was a monument to her blindness. He picked up his own pen, a simple, functional instrument, and signed his name. His signature was clean, steady, and final. The notary took the pages, her official stamp coming down with a series of solid, definitive thuds. It was done. The legal transfer was complete, copies were made, hands were shaken, or in Ethan and Isabella's case, a tense, silent acknowledgement was exchanged. As everyone began to gather their belongings, preparing to depart, Isabella couldn't resist one last twist of the knife. She looked at Ethan, who was standing by his chair, his expression unreadable. "Well, Ethan," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy, "I hope you and Emberlight will be very happy together in your little apartment. Don't spend that settlement all in one place." Marcus let out a short, derisive laugh. Ethan didn't react to the jibe. He didn't flinch. He simply looked at the minimalist clock on the wall. The long, black minute hand ticked past the 9. It was 2:46 p.m. David, who had been discreetly checking his phone under the table, caught Ethan's eye. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was the signal. The settlement had been electronically filed with the court. The transfer of the trademark was legally binding and irrevocable. At that exact moment, Ethan's phone, which he had placed face down on the table, buzzed once. A soft, single vibration that cut through the room's atmosphere like a stone dropped into a still pond. He picked it up. He didn't need to read the full message. The subject line was all that mattered. Confirmed. Innovatech X Emberlight Licensing Agreement. Executed. Below it was a notification from his bank. A wire transfer had been received. The numbers were dizzying. He took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the air fill his lungs. It felt like the first clean breath he'd taken in years. He looked up, his gaze finding Isabella, who was already turning to leave, her victory lap about to begin. "Isabella," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it had a new weight, a new resonance that made her stop. Her father and their lawyer paused as well. She turned back, an expression of annoyance on her face. "What now, Ethan? Is there some other sentimental trinket you've forgotten?" "No," he said calmly. "This isn't about the past. This is new business." He stepped forward and slid his phone across the vast, polished expanse of the mahogany table. It glided silently, coming to a stop directly in front of her. The screen was lit up, displaying a press release draft marked "Embargoed until 3 p.m." "You might want to read that," Ethan said. "It goes live in 14 minutes. Isabella glanced down at the phone, her expression a mixture of confusion and irritation. She read the headline first. Innovatech announces Emberlight, a revolutionary new smart home ecosystem, in partnership with designer Ethan Cole. Her smirk faltered. She blinked, reading it again as if the words might rearrange themselves. Her eyes darted down the screen, scanning the text. She saw the phrases, multi-billion-dollar product initiative, Groundbreaking brand philosophy, timeless design for a modern world. And then she saw the number, the one that would be seared into her memory for the rest of her life. A multi-year licensing agreement valued at $4.4 million for the brand identity, awarded to Emberlight Designs, LLC, a new venture founded by the brand's original creator, Ethan Cole. The color drained from her face. The triumphant, angelic white of her suit suddenly seemed ghostly. Her perfectly manicured hand, the one that had signed the settlement with such arrogance, trembled as she held the phone. Marcus, sensing the shift in the room's gravity, leaned over her shoulder. His confident posture sagged as he read the screen. His face, moments before flush with victory, became a pale mask of disbelief and horror. Ethan watched them, his expression no longer enigmatic. It was clear, calm, and steady. He had waited for this moment, not for revenge, but for validation, for the truth to finally have its say. He delivered the quiet bomb, the softly spoken words that would shatter their world. "You just gave me the sole and separate ownership of that brand, Isabella," he said, his voice even and devastatingly simple. "The one with no material market value. Thank you." The silence that followed was more profound than any shout could have been. It was the sound of a universe reordering itself, the sound of absolute, catastrophic miscalculation. Isabella stared at the phone, then at Ethan, her mouth slightly agape. The gears in her sharp, business-minded brain were grinding, trying to process an impossible reality. The worthless, dusty, sentimental trinket she had tossed to her pathetic ex-husband as a final act of contempt was the foundation of a multi-million-dollar deal. "No," she finally whispered, the word a puff of air. Then, louder, her voice cracking with dawning panic. "No, you can't. That's a corporate asset. It belonged to Aura. It's marital property." She looked wildly at her lawyer, her eyes pleading for him to fix this, to rewind time, to undo the catastrophic blunder she had just made. Her lawyer, who had been reading the press release over her other shoulder, looked as if he'd been punched in the stomach. This was David's cue. He stepped forward, calm and methodical, the very picture of prepared counsel. He placed his briefcase on the table and opened it, but he didn't need to take anything out. He had the facts memorized. "Actually, Isabella, it's not," he said, his tone gentle but firm, like a doctor delivering a fatal diagnosis. "Your own settlement agreement, which you signed not 10 minutes ago, is exceptionally clear on this point. It explicitly defines the Aura Lifestyle brand and all its associated intellectual property as the primary marital asset, which was transferred to you. In a separate and distinct clause, you and your counsel agreed to designate the Emberlight trademark as Mr. Cole's sole and separate property post-dissolution." He paused, letting the words sink in. He looked at Isabella's lawyer. "I believe the minutes from our negotiation meeting will reflect your own words on the matter. You referred to it as a sentimental trinket of no material value. You were so eager to grant it to Ethan as a sign of your client's generosity that you didn't even bother to conduct a standard valuation. A fatal oversight, as it turns out." Isabella's head whipped around to face her lawyer, her face a mask of pure fury. "You told me it was worthless. You let me do this." The lawyer stammered, his professional composure shattering. "How could anyone have known? It was a dormant trademark. There was no indication." "There was every indication," Marcus boomed, his voice shaking with rage, not at Ethan, but at the incompetence he was witnessing. He finally looked at Ethan, truly looked at him, for the first time. The contempt was gone, replaced by a horrified, grudging respect. He was looking at a grandmaster who had just checkmated them in 3 moves, and they had never even realized they were playing the same game. You planned this," Marcus said, the accusation laced with a strange sort of awe. Ethan didn't deny it. He simply met the older man's gaze. "I plan for my future, Marcus. Something you and your daughter were trying to deny me." Desperation clawed its way onto Isabella's face. "We can undo it. Stop the filing. We can go back to the judge and say there was a mistake, a fraudulent inducement." David shook his head slowly, a sad, clinical finality in his expression. "I'm afraid not. The settlement is executed and filed. It's a binding legal document. As for fraud, Ethan was under no legal obligation to disclose a potential future business opportunity to a party he was in an adversarial legal process with, especially when that opportunity pertained to an asset you yourself had declared worthless. He negotiated in good faith for an asset you willingly gave him. The ink is dry, Isabella, and as of approximately 6 minutes ago, the initial transfer of funds from Innovate Tech to my client's new corporate account has already been initiated. This isn't a mistake, it's a done deal." The finality of David's words hung in the air, sucking all the oxygen from the room. Isabella sank back into her chair, the power suit that had looked so formidable moments ago now seeming like a hollow costume. She had walked into this room a queen, convinced she was taking the entire kingdom. Now she realized she had been a pawn all along, expertly maneuvered into sacrificing her own most valuable piece without a second thought. The silence was broken only by the frantic, whispered argument that erupted between her and her ashen-faced lawyer. Ethan and David quietly gathered their papers. There was nothing more to say. The truth had been spoken, and its echo would reverberate for a long, long time. The weeks that followed the signing were a slow-motion explosion. The Innovate Tech press release didn't just go live. It detonated across the tech and business worlds. Emberlight was suddenly the most talked-about brand of the year. Tech blogs, design journals, and financial news outlets all ran features on the genius of the branding, its perfect marriage of high-tech innovation and soulful, human-centric design. And at the center of every story was Ethan Cole, the quiet, brilliant designer who had been sitting on a goldmine. He was lauded as a visionary, a master of brand philosophy. In this bright, shining light, Aura Lifestyle began to look like a shadow. The stories often mentioned it in passing, an almost parenthetical note about Ethan's former venture. Suddenly, Aura wasn't the aspirational, cutting-edge brand Isabella believed it to be. It was yesterday's news, the prequel to the main event. Isabella's world began to unravel, not quickly, but with a sickening, inexorable certainty. Her first move was a desperate, angry legal challenge, just as she'd threatened. It was summarily dismissed by a judge who, after reviewing the settlement she had so confidently signed, practically laughed her out of court. The failed lawsuit only generated more negative press, painting her as petty and grasping. Worse, the soul of Aura had indeed departed with Ethan. The Copenhagen design firm she had hired, so fresh and hungry, produced a new line that was technically proficient but emotionally sterile. It was a soulless imitation of Scandinavian design tropes, lacking the subtle warmth and intellectual rigor that had been Ethan's signature. The new collection launched to a lukewarm reception from critics, and more importantly from customers. Sales, for the first time in the company's history, began to stagnate, then dip. The brand, once a reflection of authentic style, now felt hollow, like a beautiful shell with nothing inside. Marcus was apoplectic. His reputation in the business community was inextricably linked to his daughter's success. Her spectacular failure was a stain on him. He called Ethan once, his voice a low growl, a mixture of threat and twisted appeal. "You have to fix this, boy," he'd snarled over the phone. "This is a family matter. You owe us." "I don't owe you anything, Marcus," Ethan had replied, his voice devoid of anger, full of a calm, weary finality. "I have a lawyer. His name is David. You can speak with him from now on." He hung up the phone and blocked Marcus's number. The fallout poisoned the relationship between Isabella and her father. He saw her now not as his brilliant protege, but as an arrogant fool who had been outmaneuvered. Their conversations became clipped and accusatory. The pride he once had in her curdled into bitter disappointment. Isabella was trapped in the gilded cage she had built. The sprawling house, once a symbol of her success, now felt vast and empty. Every aura-branded object, the minimalist sofa, the elegant ceramic vases, the crisp linen sheets, was a mocking reminder of what she had lost. The brand wasn't just a company, it was her entire identity, and now that identity was failing. She would walk through the silent rooms, her own footsteps echoing, and see Ethan's ghost everywhere, not as a specter of the man she dismissed, but as the ghost of the talent she had thrown away. She found herself picking up her phone to call him, her thumb hovering over his name. What would she say? I'm sorry? You were right? Please come back? The words felt like stones in her throat. Her pride, the very trait that had led her to this point, was a wall she couldn't seem to climb. So she would put the phone down, the silence of the house rushing back in, louder than before. She had won the battle she had been fighting, but in doing so, had lost a war she never even knew she was in. Her victory was a desolate island, and she was its sole, lonely inhabitant. Months bled into a year. The world turned, and fortunes with it. Ethan's new life took shape with the same deliberate, thoughtful precision he applied to his designs. He didn't indulge in flashy cars or extravagant parties. Instead, he invested in his work. He leased a beautiful, light-filled studio in a converted warehouse district, a space with high ceilings and old brick walls. He hired a small, dedicated team of young designers who looked at him with admiration and respect. Emberlight Designs, LLC wasn't just a holding company for a licensing deal. It became a vibrant, creative hub. He was no longer the silent partner. He was the visionary, sought after for his opinions, his insights, his unique philosophy. He was a man who had come into his own, not because of the money, but because his worth was finally being reflected back at him by the world. He was calm, focused, and at peace. His victory wasn't a source of gloating. It was a foundation upon which he was building a meaningful life. For Isabella, the same passage of time brought only decay. Aura Lifestyle continued its slow, painful decline. The brand had lost its anchor, and now it was adrift, tossed about by changing trends. It was seen as inauthentic, a hollow echo of its former self. To save the company from bankruptcy, Isabella was forced to do the unthinkable. She had to sell the house. The symbol of her triumph became the price of her survival. Even that wasn't enough. With mounting debt and cratering sales, she was forced to sell Aura itself. The company that was once valued in the tens of millions sold for a fraction of its peak worth, picked up by a larger conglomerate that would likely absorb it and discontinue the name. Her empire had crumbled to dust. Her relationship with her father was in ruins. Marcus, a man who worshipped success and despised failure, could barely look at her. His support, both financial and emotional, had evaporated. He had backed a losing horse, and his pride couldn't bear it. Humbled, stripped of her company, her house, and her father's esteem, Isabella was forced to start over. She was a brilliant business person on paper, but her reputation was tarnished. The story of her divorce and the Emberlight deal had become a cautionary tale in their social and professional circles. Finally, she swallowed the last bitter dregs of her pride. She sent Ethan an email, one line long. Can we talk? They met at a neutral, anonymous coffee shop halfway between his studio and the small apartment she now rented. When he saw her, he felt not a surge of triumph, but a pang of something like sadness. The sharp, confident edges she had always worn were gone, replaced by a visible weariness. She looked smaller, diminished. She stumbled through an apology, her words tangled in excuses. I had no idea, Ethan. If you had just told me what you were working on, what Innovatech was offering, we could have been partners in it. Ethan listened patiently, stirring his coffee. When she finished, he looked at her, his gaze not unkind, but unflinchingly clear. This was the moment for the moral mirror, the moment to reflect her own behavior back to her, not as an attack, but as a statement of fact. "Told you?" he repeated softly. "When would I have told you, Isabella? When you were mocking my work in front of your father and our friends? When you were telling me my ideas were old and sad? When you were standing in my office doorway, watching me pack my life into a box like a fired employee?" Each question landed with quiet, devastating accuracy. Her justifications crumbled under the weight of his simple, unadorned truth. "This wasn't about a lack of information," he continued, his voice steady. "I could have shouted it from the rooftops, and you wouldn't have heard it, because you had already decided what I was worth. You never saw me as a partner. You saw me as an accessory you could manage, and eventually discard. The problem wasn't that I didn't tell you about the deal, Isabella. The problem was you were never listening to me at all." Her eyes filled with tears, not the performative, angry tears he had seen before, but tears of genuine, soul-crushing realization. In that moment, sitting in a cheap coffee shop, stripped of all her power and prestige, she finally saw him. And in seeing him, she finally saw herself. The reflection was not pretty. It was the breaking point she had needed all along, the only thing that could ever truly pave the way for a new beginning. Ethan did not take her back. Their story was not a romance, and this was not a chapter about reconciliation. His quiet confrontation in the coffee shop was not an opening for negotiation. It was an act of closure. He accepted her broken, tearful apology because he recognized it as genuine, the first truly honest thing she had said to him in years. But forgiveness and forgetting are two different things. He wished her well, a quiet and sincere sentiment, and then he walked out of the coffee shop and back into his own life. His victory was never about her ruin. It was about his own peace. He had found it. A year later, the landscape of their lives was irrevocably altered. Ethan stood on a stage in Milan, accepting a prestigious international design award for the Emberlight brand. The product line was a global phenomenon, celebrated for its elegance and humanity. He spoke to the crowd about his philosophy, about the importance of creating things with soul, about the quiet power of enduring ideas. He was not just successful, he was fulfilled. He had found a new relationship with a woman who was his true partner, an architect who saw and celebrated his brilliance, just as he did hers. His life was a testament to the fact that patience and integrity could, in the end, triumph over loudmouthed arrogance. Isabella's path was quieter, harder, and far from the glittering heights she had once occupied. After selling Aura, she had taken a mid-level marketing position at a respectable, if unglamorous, firm. She was good at her job, but she was no longer the one in charge. She had to answer to others, to work within a team, to earn respect rather than demand it. She was learning humility on a daily basis. It was not a dramatic punishment, but a realistic and fitting consequence. She was rebuilding her life, not on a foundation of status and acquisition, but on the difficult, rocky ground of self-awareness. Perhaps one day, she would build something strong there. Ethan's story became a quiet legend, a modern fable shared in design schools and boardrooms. It served as a powerful reminder that true worth is not determined by the opinions of those who refuse to see it. It is an intrinsic quality, an ember that can glow for years in the dark, waiting for the right moment to be fanned into a brilliant flame. It teaches us that the loudest voice in the room is not always the most powerful, and that sometimes the greatest strength lies in quiet confidence, strategic patience, and an unwavering belief in the value of your own work. So what do you think? Was Isabella's downfall a just and deserved outcome? Or should Ethan have been more upfront about the Innovate Tech deal before the divorce was final? It's a complex moral question, and I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective adds so much to these stories. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you found value in this story, please consider giving it a like and subscribing for more tales of justice, redemption, and the quiet triumphs of the underestimated. Until next time, remember to value the quiet ones. You never know what brilliance they're hiding.